1974, I was 12 years old, visiting my sister Em and her family in Davie, Florida, with my cousin Ed, who was 15 at the time. One night we were sleeping on a pull-out couch in the sitting room when we smelled something like a skunk, only worse. We asked my sister what it was. She said it was a skunk ape and he comes around in the hottest summers. We didn't believe her, so we asked our friends, and they said it was real. One night while we were sleeping, we saw a huge shadow come across the picture window. Then it turned, looked at itself, and went out a blood-curdling scream that scared us half to death. Then it turned and walked to the side of the house, and we followed it by going to the side bathroom. Then it squatted down to eat a wild watermelon. Then it went to the back of the house to a man-made lake, squatted down, and drank some water. A few nights later, the beast attacked a wild horse in its corral, but the horse got away by jumping over the corral and ran off into the pasture. The rancher came out and took a few shots at the beast, but it got away. When the horse came back, it had fingerprints on its hindquarters. No scratches, but finger marks. A few nights later, the beast came back and killed a farmer's bull. The farmer took a few shots at the beast but missed it. At the same time, my sister and her husband Jay were coming home from a night out, and the sheriff and his deputy were on patrol. We jumped into Joe's car and fought the deputy when the beast stepped out of the darkness and was hit by the police car. The beast went down, and when it got up, it looked into the police car and let out a blood-curdling yell. We were about 10 feet behind the deputy car when the beast hit the police car with both hands, and the back of the car came off the ground. Then it limped into the swamp. When the sheriff got there, the car looked like it hit a utility pole. Just then the farmer came over and told the sheriff that his prize bull was dead. This bull was huge, at least a ton, with its head ripped off and thrown across the pasture. That's when they called in the state police with their horses, dogs, and helicopters. They searched the swamp all night but found nothing. So a year has passed since I fully realized they were real, and I'd gotten a couple friends on board, at least enough to go camping and see what we could find. We ended up at a campground in Lost Creek Wilderness, a little ways northwest of Pike Peak, Colorado. We really didn't expect to find anything on this first trip, and we were skeptical of the signs we came across until the morning. We did notice a couple things. In an aspen grove nearby, we found an aspen tree that was broken off at its base. Nearby was this area of matted grass. We also found a few broken off trunks, 8 to 10 feet tall aspen trees, sort of hidden, laying behind some rocks. Later that night, sitting around the fire, one of my friends suddenly said, "Whoa, I just saw a flash of light over there." We decided it must have been a headlight shining through the trees from the road in the distance, but I turned around to look in the direction he'd been looking. Then I saw it too. A bright yellow light circle of light appeared to peek out from behind a tree some 20 feet away, briefly come into view before going back behind the tree. We again chalked it up to being a headlight, but examining the line of sight during the daytime, I don't think that's possible. The road is quite a ways away in that direction, and obscured by many pine trees. If visible, a headlight would be scattered by the pines at least. What I saw was sharply defined and circular. Also, definitely felt watched, but I wasn't into trusting those feelings much at that time, so I brushed it off. The following morning, we did a little hike, and as we were getting back to camp walking along the creek, someone noticed this stick structure on the other side of the creek. For an idea of scale, the tallest tree in that arch is probably 9 to 10 feet tall, but it's not possible to get over there without wading through cold, deep, fast-moving water. We're kind of dumbfounded by the sight because not only how but why would a person make that, and we're making the connection to the broken off tree stashed on our side of the creek, not yet placed, and again, why would a person break the tree rather than using an axe? We stand in silence for a while just thinking, and as I'm staring at the point in the middle of the creek, a rock splashes directly in the center of my field of view. I asked him if my friend saw it, and he said he had. We both thought it was weird. Later, though, he confessed he hadn't actually seen the rock I saw, but had seen one earlier that I didn't notice and didn't just say anything then. Our attitude after that first trip was sort of hesitantly amazing. We really hadn't expected anything and weren't really certain yet, but couldn't deny that we had a lot of reason to go back to that exact spot, which we did 2 days later. This time we did a night hike around midnight. We got a nearby ridge that overlooks a steep, bowl-shaped slope a little ways away. I stopped a bit below that crest to catch my breath, so I was the last one at the top. I reached the top, and almost immediately we all heard a powerful crack like lightning from the middle of the other slope, followed by the sound of a tree hitting the ground. A tree broke on a perfectly clear, windless night right as the last member of our group came into earshot of it. I want to leave my subjective interpretation out as much as possible. This was an incredible moment in my life. The apprehension from the hike through dark trees instantly vanished, replaced by awe. God, what a mighty sound. It was like they were telling us, don't worry, we're all the way over here, but don't come any closer. I remember my good friend saying, I thought it would be scary, but it's just cool. We were all a little slack-jawed and teary-eyed. We tried to knock to them, but the tree break was the only thing we heard that night. The next morning, two of us went on a sunrise hike. Thinking we'd stop at the same ridge, but we ended up going all the way up the peak right above the campground. On our way down, we found another stick structure. I think I caught a glimpse of one of them peeking out at us from behind a tree while we were hanging out near the structure, but it was far enough away and obscured by pine needles that I couldn't be sure. There were two eyes glowing a pale blue in the early morning darkness, framed by dark brown with a ring of light brown hair around the face. I could barely make it out, but the thing that kept me staring at it was the peeking motion. One eye back behind the tree, two eyes back behind the tree. This was accompanied by a strange-sounding chirping noise from that location, another location off to its right. I eventually began to feel very uncomfortable, like we were outstaying our welcome, and insisted that we headed back down. A friend and I were hiking not far from downtown Salt Lake City in July 2014. After a while, we decided to rest a bit. It was around 5:15 p.m. Since the trail was narrow and crowded with brush, we left the trail to rest under some very tall fir trees when the bushes were less thick, but it was still shady. July in Salt Lake City is close to 100 degrees. As I was leaning on a stump, I noticed that we were standing among several trees that formed a teepee shape. As we were noticing and discussing it, I heard a loud crash and then a twig snap a few yards in front of me. For context, my back was to the trail, so I was facing the hillside and deeper forest growth while my friend was facing the trail with his back towards the hillside. The trees in the teepee formation were to my right, about 10 feet where my friend was facing them in the trail, so my head was turned about 90 degrees when I heard the commotion coming from the base of the hillside. I immediately looked toward the sound and saw a humanoid covered with dark brown hair moving quickly behind the thick brush. He wasn't more than 6-ish feet tall, and I didn't get a good look at his face because he turned and moved so quickly. I noticed that his hair was two-toned, with darker hair on his head and shoulders and the lighter hair on his midriff. His legs appeared darker. I shouted, "Did you see that?" to my friend while trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The last time I saw someone tromping through the brush in that area was in the early spring. There were two ex-country skiers coming back down the mountain. The one in front was wearing a blue jacket with the typical two-tone dark gray shoulder pattern. So for some reason, it was the first explanation that my brain came up with for what I was seeing there in July. I mean, I could clearly recall the hairy creature, but at the same time, my brain was refusing to believe it, and I was trying to come up with a scenario for the situation. All it could muster was a skier hiking through the forest, not on the trail, but fully dressed in dark ski clothes from head to toe in July. At any rate, I then began to call out, "Hello, hey, hello," while also trying to listen for the direction of his retreat between my calls. My friend ran up to the spot to see if he could see anything. He'd only seen a blur by the time he had turned all the way around to see what had made the noise, so he wasn't sure what we were looking for. Even though it was only a few short yards to the spot where I saw our skier, there was nothing there. I regained my senses and ran to see if there were any tracks. I found one, but it resembled more of the kind of print you'd find in deep sand, more of a dugout type of depression in the needles. I measured it from side to side, and it was about an inch longer and wider on each side than the size 11 sandals I was wearing. I hadn't heard any crashing through the brush after the initial noise that grabbed my attention, so I was unable to determine what had happened to the skier after it passed behind the brush. There were small green plants covering the ground in the direction he went, but they were only compressed and then quickly ran out at the edge of a very small and gentle ravine running back up the hill. We scanned for tracks, but I didn't feel like pursuing it into deeper brush or up the ravine, so we went back to the trail. Oddly, neither of us felt threatened in the least, and although the valley we were hiking up was very narrow, we just continued up the trail in the same direction our furry friend had gone. We thought we heard movement up the hillside a few times and from various directions, but still never felt threatened. After an hour or so of high awareness hiking, we turned back so we wouldn't get caught up after sundown. After giving it some thought, I found it highly suspicious that the creature had disappeared so quickly through the brush, without any noise except for the initial crash. I wonder now if the noise was a deliberate attempt to get our attention, not as a trap, but rather as an alert, a sort of, "Hey, we're here, please respect our space." I'm never going to hike there alone again, that's for sure, but I'm definitely going back up there with a friend or two. I like to look for more indications of an individual or family group. If a group had moved in, I like to know. Otherwise, I might assume it was an itinerant male just passing through. I was hiking Sourdough Mountain in the North Cascades. It's a pretty grueling hike, like 13 miles and 6,000 feet of elevation gain. Met a random couple at the trailhead and we hiked together. Halfway up the mountain, at a small clearing, I hear a tree knock, then two more tree knocks. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was like someone banging on a tree with a baseball bat. If you've ever hiked an actual mountain, the notion that someone is off trail way deep in the timber, pranking someone by banging trees is insane, while you're 3 hours up the side of a steep mountain. Anyways, nothing else happened, and we reached the peak at about 3:30 p.m. There were a few hikers coming down the mountain, as we started pretty late in the morning, so we were the last ones on the mountain. After enjoying the view, we started our way back down the switchbacks. The couple was hiking quickly, so I fell behind as I was enjoying the views and the berries and just the entire experience. The couple disappeared from view, and I was totally alone. Now, I know you're supposed to make noise while hiking, as there are tons of bears up there, so I was singing a little song to make noise when all of a sudden I heard rustling of footsteps over my right shoulder. It sounded like bipedal footsteps, but I knew there were no people behind me, so it freaked me out a bit. Then the footsteps would mirror mine. I would stop and the rustling stopped. I would start and they would start again. This really creeped me out a bit, but I still had no idea what it was. Then the entire forest went totally silent. It was like a heavy blanket was over the atmosphere. No wind, no birds, no bugs, nothing. This was the creepiest moment I have ever experienced until shortly after, and suddenly it felt like I was being watched. It was such a strong feeling. It was like two laser beams were burning into my head. I felt like I was a prey animal and some predator was about to attack me. Total instinctual fear. I continued hiking and turning around to see what it was, but saw nothing. I turned around a few times until I reached a small clearing in the woods and turned and looked, and there it was, sitting about 80 yards way up the mountain. It was sitting or standing, not exactly sure, because the bottom half was covered by leaves and bushes. But there it was, a giant hairy man slash gorilla looking creature. It was dark brown and had long hair all over it. Didn't look like fur, it looked like hair, massive shoulders. It looked like an old school football player with the pads on. No neck. The head looked like it was right on the shoulders. It looked like the head had a slight conical shape to it. Huge eye sockets like brow ridge. Huge dark eyes. I couldn't see any whites, but it was 80 yards away, and I was just in shock. I couldn't believe it was real. I was in shock and awe as I stared at this thing. When I looked into its eyes, it was like I got total tunnel vision, and it was hypnotizing. It felt like I was in a trance as I stared at it. I said under my breath, "Holy shit," and did a small nervous laugh. That's when it moved its arms. It was so massive, and when it moved, that's when I snapped out of my trance and my logical brain took over. And the most intense fear slash dread washed over me as I thought, "Holy shit, that's a massive wild animal, and I have no idea what it's thinking or what it's gonna do." The entire visual encounter, from the moment I first saw it to the moment I turned around and left, must have been 1 minute, maybe 45 seconds. It felt like hours. It couldn't have been more than a minute in real time, though. It felt like I was about to die or get eaten. I just turned quickly and continued hiking down the mountain. I just turned away and laughed, and I didn't hear anything after that. I ran down the mountain so fast, which was supposed to take 2.5 hours to 3 hours. It took me an hour and a half. I didn't stop running until I got to my car. Back at the end of June 2022, approximately June 24th, I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky for Army Cadet training. The last 12 days of our training consisted of 3 separate 3-day field iterations, where we would move as a platoon in the thick Kentucky woods and sleep in our sleeping bag systems at night. The Kentucky wilderness was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I had never seen terrain so wild looking and land so untouched, as this is government training property that goes on for so many acres. But some of the acres we tracked through were actually state gate land that hunters could technically be in while we trained, as most military field training is, although civilians would not be permitted to be in proximity to us as we were carrying M4s and other crew service weapons. I've grown up a believer of Bigfoot, but it never crossed my mind that I may come across one. Being out in the wilderness for 3 days at a time and not being able to shower, so the fourth day of each 3-day field training exercise, our platoon of around 24 cadets would smell, but we also became one with the woods. We actually probably didn't smell at all to any creatures, as we have been living in the mud, laying in it every day all day. I'm also a hunter, so I know a thing or two about my scent and any receptiveness of animals. Also, our smell may not have necessarily mattered because the thick woods was being infiltrated by a bunch of cadets other than our platoon. Also, another thing to mention, for the training, I was one of the first regiments to go through, meaning that all this woods doesn't really get occupied all year long, and my platoon was one of the first groups to get in there and start kicking shit up, if you know what I mean. If anything lived out there, there's a good chance it was scared shitless with a bunch of army people coming in the woods and start shooting blanks. On the last day of the third 3-day iteration, our instructors cut us a break. When we finally set up our patrol base for the night, our instructors told us that we didn't have to remain in a tactical environment. This meant we could talk amongst ourselves, and we ended up having a little hangout in the woods before we went to bed. We also didn't have a pole security throughout the night. This meant no one had to stay awake throughout the night, whereas any other night we would, and there were some strange things heard them too by the cadets. We were positioned about a quarter mile from a little lake called Tobacco Leaf Lake. It was a real muddy lake. Everywhere around us was very thick woods with even thicker tall grass, even a little bit of an eerie feeling like you're being watched when we were walking around. If you've ever been up in thick Kentucky woods and seen the tall grass that goes above your head, the stalks that tower over you, the terrain that switches from tall grass, open areas to thick patches of woods with rolling hills mixed between, it's not ordinary terrain. In fact, I rarely even saw a deer, but I actually snuck up on a fawn one day while being point man. Anyway, before we went to bed, we had a gunfight with blank rounds. This was part of the training, so we made a bit of commotion. It was time for bed and everyone zipped into their sleeping bags. It was cold out that night, the coldest it had been the whole 42 hours I was at Fort Knox. I snacked on some beef jerky my mom sent me and went to sleep, and so did everyone else. I estimated it was around 12:30 a.m. when I started to drift out of sleep and become fully awake. When I began to hear noises, these noises were whooping noises and footsteps approaching all our quiet sleeping bodies on the ground. Keep in mind we were all sleeping in sleeping bags, spaced out in a triangle shape. It started to get closer, and at that point I was wide awake, completely zipped in my sleeping bag again. It sounded like 2 feet walking, and it would stop and shuffle its feet at times. The first whoop I heard was loud. It walked around 10 to 20 feet, then it would stop and whoop again. But here's the weirdest part. After it would do the whoops, it would be followed by a very fast clicking noise. It almost sounded like a gorilla clicking its lips in videos I've seen. The noise was consistent. Every time it would stop, it would whoop 3 times, then start the clicking noises. I'm a hunter. I've heard all types of animals, and to this day, I cannot identify this noise. To resume the story, this is where readers will get mad at me, but you cannot judge me because you were not in this situation. After I was fully awake, the animal had made its way into the complete center of my triangle sleeping area, which was in the middle of the woods. There's no structures, just sleeping bags on the ground. When it stopped in the middle, it made the sound again, loud as ever. At this point, I was very nervous and had no idea what was standing about 10 feet away from me. I contemplated moving my hand to unzip my bag to try and snap a picture with my flash, but something in my brain told me to stop. Instead, I laid there and listened. It eventually did its same routine and kept moving in a straight line away from our encampment. Believe me, I was shaking. I believe it didn't even know we were there, and it seemed like it got separated from where it was and was calling to find others. With my heart pounding, I heard others that must have been woken up from the noise wrestling around in their bags. As I said out loud, "What the fuck was that?" No response. I went back to bed and heard the sound fade into the distance. The next morning, we all woke up and immediately started going around and asking others what they heard. Most never heard it, but some did. The responses from one that did said, "It was a skunk, bro," or "I don't know what that was." One person said, "Whatever the hell that was, it stepped on my sleeping bag." Most people didn't really care, but I did. I'm almost a light sleeper, and we were all tired from training, so I wouldn't be surprised if everyone just slept right through it. About 6 months later, I contacted our group again and brought up the question, what did you guys hear? I then got another reply saying it was a skunk, but no one got eyes on it. The kid that said it was a skunk was also a know-it-all and doesn't hunt or anything. The same morning, I looked around for tracks or hair, but we had to move out of the area shortly, and it was all dry dirt or leaves, so I didn't find anything.